Mr. Chester, if you'll raise your right hand, I do solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence I give upon this Senate of the Texas impeachment charges against Warren Kenneth Paxton Jr. shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. I do. Please have a seat. And as we encourage everyone, be close to the mic as you can. I'm sorry. To be as close to the microphone as you can be when you speak. Thank you. You may proceed, Ms. Epley.
Thank you, Mr. President. Please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the Senate.
My name is Ray Chester.
And Mr. Chester, what do you do for a living?
I'm an attorney in private practice. I'm a partner at the Austin law firm of McGinnis Lockridge.
Are you the same Ray Chester that we might have heard connected to the Mitty Foundation and issues with the Office of the Attorney General in 2020?
Yes, I've represented the Mitty Foundation since 2016.
And where is the Mitty Foundation located?
Currently, they're mainly located in Brownsville.
Okay. What does the Mitty Foundation do?
Currently, well, they were started by Roy Mitty, who grew up dirt poor in Brownsville and self-made man. It's actually a family foundation. It's not a public charity. They don't accept public donations. And for many years, they mainly provided scholarships to needy students. And in recent years, they've shifted their focus back to Roy's hometown of Brownsville, and they've developed the Mitty Cultural District in Brownsville.
Who runs the Mitty Foundation now?
Roy's grandson, R.J. Mitty. R.J. was born with cerebral palsy. You may know him as Walt Jr. from the TV show Breaking Bad. He's an accomplished actor. More importantly, he's an international spokesperson on disabilities and the rights of the disabled. He's worked with the United Nations, the State Department, United Cerebral Palsy Foundation, and he gives motivational speeches to students on anti-bullying and overcoming disabilities.
Thank you, sir. The Mitty Foundation has been disparaged somewhat over the last couple of days in regards to prior management. How long ago were those issues?
They were in the 2000s, and the Mitty Foundation received a clean bill of health in 2011 and has been squeaky clean ever since.
Has management changed since that date?
Yes, the problems were Roy's son and RJ's dad.
Let me interrupt you, Mr. Chester. I'm sorry. I'm on a time clock, and I expect they might ask you those questions.
Okay.
What I'm trying to determine is there any rational basis, given the change of management and the time frame, for the Office of the Attorney General to use those issues to justify intervention?
Objection.
None.
Objection, Mr. President, calls for speculation and improper opinion by this witness without a predicate.
Overruled.
You may answer the question.
None whatsoever.
Let me turn your attention quickly then to the settlement from World Class Holdings that we've heard in detail. What was that settlement value?
We settled in July of 2019 for $10.5 million.
After the breach of contract, what did the Office of the Attorney General push you to settle for at mediation?
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Your Honor, if I may, he was present at the interactions. It's an operative fact, and it's already in the record. There is no harm from the hearsay.
I ruled.
Okay.
Mr. President, to be clear, because this may come up again, all these conversations would be privileged under Texas Rule of Evidence 408 as settlement discussions as well.
Mr. Chester, would you or the Mitty Foundation have an opinion as to whether or not you're interested in waiving that privilege?
We are willing to waive that privilege.
In that case, what would the result have been of you agreeing to settle at the mediation with Darren McCarty?
Objection calls for speculation and hearsay.
Overruled.
We would have received pennies on the dollar.
Do you have an approximate value, or do you recall the number that you were pushed to accept?
The only firm offer was...
Objection, Mr. President. Hearsay.
Your Honor, it's an admission by party opponent. It was an action on behalf of Ken Paxton by the Office of the Attorney General, and it's integral to the facts of this case.
And there is no evidence of that. None.
The evidence comes from the witness, as it always does in trial.
Stop for a moment. Overruled.
Let me do it this way, since relevant facts are already in the record for the Senate to consider. What is the end result, considering that you were able to proceed with litigation?
We are poised to wrap up the litigation. The partnership properties are under contract. MIDI stands to receive approximately $23 million.
And when you say stands to receive, is that up to whether or not Nate Paul or World Class Holdings chooses to pay you?
No, fortunately, we're not depending on that because that would be fruitless. We will be paid out of the sales proceeds.
So the $23 million will come out of the sale of the property itself without any decision-making on the part of Nate Paul or World Class Holdings?
Correct.
Is that a delta of almost $18 million in loss if you had taken prior deals?
Then leading.
Sustain.
What is the difference between those values and where you ended up?
It's going to be about $17 million more than we were offered when the Attorney General was involved.
Thank you. Pass the witness.
Mr. Little.
Mr. President. Mr. Chester, how much money did your client, the MIDI Foundation, invest with Nate Paul?
$3 million. Well, in these two projects, $3 million. There were some other projects as well.
Okay, but the projects that are at issue in the litigation we are here to talk about, the MIDI Foundation invested $3 million in charitable funds with Nate Paul, correct?
With family foundation funds, yes.
Yes, and when we say family foundation funds, those are funds that were committed by the family to the charity, true?
Yes.
Okay, and of those $3 million that were invested in this program with Nate Paul, it's really a private equity real estate deal, right?
It's a limited partnership.
Yeah, which we generally refer to as a private equity deal, right?
There's a slight nuance difference, but it's similar.
Yeah, it's very similar. You're in business litigation, correct?
Yes.
You've been in business litigation a long time, right?
Yes.
How many years?
Well, I've focused on commercial litigation about the last 10 years. Before that, I did other things.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I can harmonize this for everybody. The MIDI Foundation invested $3 million with Nate Paul, and they're going to get $23 million back, right?
Right. We invested in 2010, 2011. Yes, sir.
Right. So who at the charity made the decision to invest charitable funds in a private equity real estate deal?
That would have been the board at the time.
And how many years did you say you've been doing business litigation?
Full-time, 10, off and on, my whole career.
Okay. Have you ever seen a charity make a $3 million investment in a private equity real estate deal before this?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Do you remember the circumstance?
No, and I don't think it was exactly $3 million, but I just don't think it's an uncommon occurrence. They actually had 4 successful investments with Mr. Paul before his troubles arose.
I want to make sure that the jury heard that because I don't think I heard it very clearly. What did you say?
I said that they had a total of 6 investments, and the first 3 they made money on. The 4th one, he tried to swindle them. They still made money, and now there's 2 remaining.
Okay. But the one that you're saying Nate Paul tried to swindle them on, that's the one they're going to make $23 million. They're going to make, I'm sorry. You're shaking your head at me.
I may have misled you. The last 2 are the ones that they're going to make $23 million on. The 4th one was the one he tried to swindle them on.
Okay. That has nothing to do with the litigation.
Not really, no.
So the MIDI Foundations have been the MIDI Foundation's been a long-time investor with Nate Paul before having anything to do with the Attorney General. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. During the pendency of your representation, has leadership of the MIDI Foundation changed?
Yes.
And do you know a man named Dilum Chandrasoma?
I do.
And he is no longer with the foundation, is that right?
That's right.
And what were the circumstances, Mr. Chester, under which he exited that? Foundation?
He was arrested in 2019 for a domestic incident. The charges were later dropped, but we immediately asked him to resign.
He was accused of beating his wife and son, I think.
I don't know the details, but it was some type of domestic violence incident.
Something like that?
Charges were dropped, though.
I see. On an affidavit of non-prosecution, I'm sure, by his family, true?
I don't know, but we asked him to retire nonetheless.
Now, by the time the AG's office intervened in your pending action, your client had spent almost $800,000 or so with you, true?
Right. Most of that after...
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Overruled.
Right. Most of that after Mr. Paul defaulted on the settlement, yes.
Okay, so just to be clear, your law firm charged, and I want to make sure that we have this in order. These are charitable funds that the foundation is paying you with, right?
Yes.
And you charge that client almost $800,000, right?
At reduced
Objection,
rates,
Your Honor.
since it was a charity.
I'm sorry. Objection, Your Honor, relevance. If I could take him on a brief voir dire, I would be able to establish why attorney's fees are irrelevant to any conversation here.
Mr. President, we don't voir dire on relevance. The clear relevance of this is how the Mitty Foundation uses its money. It's at issue on direct. It's at issue now.
It is also recuperated.
Overruled.
Okay. So you were charging, I believe, $450 an hour to the foundation, right?
At that time, yes.
And that's well below your rack rate of $625 at the time, right?
Might have been $715 at the time, but yes, it was well below my normal rate.
And what's your rate now?
My standard rate is $715.
Okay. And you had already, by the point the OAG's office intervened in the dispute, you had already gone through a AAA arbitration, correct?
We were just getting going in a AAA arbitration.
I'm sorry, you and I are both business litigators, so this may be a little inside baseball, but AAA is American Arbitration Association, yes?
Right.
Yes, and so what had happened was you, on behalf of your client, filed a AAA proceeding to arbitrate a dispute with Nate Paul's businesses, right?
Actually, Nate Paul filed it, but yes.
But you had counterclaims, right?
Yes, we did.
And you prevailed, right?
We won, yes.
Yeah, but to be fair, you never gave the Attorney General's office notice of that proceeding as is required by law, true?
I believe the law requires notice of a lawsuit, and there was a lawsuit, and I was a little late giving them notice.
And you were probably close to a year late, right? Something like that?
Yes. However, the lawsuit was dormant for most of that year, but yes.
I'm not being accusatory. You just didn't know.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
The judge told me, she was the former head of charitable trust, and she said, have you given the AG's office notice? I'm like, oh my God. And so I sent it the next day.
Of course, of course. So the pendency of the intervention by the Attorney General's office, it lasted a total of about 3 months, right?
Approximately.
Okay. Between us business litigators, 3 months is nothing in the life of business litigation, is it?
Well, this has been going on 5 years, so I recognize your point, but those are some crucial 3 months that cost us a lot of time and money.
Well, I want to talk about what happened during that period of time. So at some point, the Office of the Attorney General intervened, and that's, well, why don't we just go ahead and pull it out so everybody has it in the record. I'm going to show you what's been previously marked as Exhibit AG 156. May I approach the witness, Your Honor?
Thank you. Am I doing okay with the microphone?
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
Now, if you would, Mr. Arroyo, Exhibit AG 156. Thank you. And Mr. Chester, just tell the jury, when was this filed?
June 8th of 2020, 10 days after the stay was lifted.
Okay. Now I'm going to hand you a really big document.
Oh, my Lord.
I know. That's what I said, too. Now, this is the transcript of the hearing on your motion for sanctions. Okay?
Okay. Which one? We had about 8 of those.
You got a bunch of them, right? This one is from June 25, 2020, 17 days after the AG's office intervened.
Okay.
It's marked as AG Exhibit 13.
Ugh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Little, are you entering this into evidence?
I am, Mr. President. This is AG Exhibit 13. We move for admission.
No objection.
I was glad you say you didn't want to read it. We'd have been here for a while. No objection. Enter
Now,
0013 into evidence.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Chester, as a litigator, if the AG's office were going to intervene to help Nate Paul, your motion for sanctions and the receiver's motion for contempt and sanctions probably a pretty good time to do it, huh?
I couldn't comment on that.
Well, why don't you hold,
I'm not sure what you mean.
this is 433 pages. Why don't you just hold this booger up for the jury, if you would? Just hold it up for them so they can see it.
It's the transcript's only about a first third. The rest of it's exhibits. But
Yes, and this was a lengthy hearing. You argued, you introduced evidence, offered and admitted it, true?
yes, sir, I did my best.
It looks like you did. It looks like you did a very good job. You won this hearing, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Did the Office of the Attorney General fight for Nate Paul on any of it?
Not in this hearing.
They didn't try to keep him out of contempt. They didn't try to keep him out of discovery sanctions, did they?
Not in this hearing.
At some point in time toward the end of June, so maybe about 3 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks after the intervention, you were contacted about doing a mediation by someone at the AG's office, true?
I was contacted almost daily about that from the moment the intervention was filed.
And to be clear for the jury who may or may not be civil litigators, I know some of them are, mediation is just a formal settlement conference presided over by a mediator, yes?
Right. This would have been our third one in this case.
Yes, and so what the AG's office was proposing was to have the parties, the Mitty Foundation and the Nate Paul entities, come together with the mediator to see if they could reach a settlement, true?
Yes, it would have been the third mediation and we'd already settled the case. But yes, sir, you're correct.
Okay, and to be clear, you could not settle the case, correct?
Explain, please.
Yeah, you couldn't settle the case, and one of the reasons was your other SEC attorneys are, well, let me try to back into this a little bit differently. How many lawyers do you have at McGinnis Lockridge?
70 or so.
Do you have securities enforcement attorneys?
Securities enforcement attorneys. No, we do not.
Okay. Do you have securities litigators at your firm?
You're looking at him.
I'm looking at him?
Yes, sir.
You're a man of many talents, aren't you? So
I know a little bit about everything and not a lot about anything.
That's great. Speaks very highly of you. So, Mr. Chester, at this point in time, one of the concerns that you had was back in 2019 when Nate Paul was raided, the SEC had someone involved in that raid, true?
That was, yes.
And one of your concerns about settling the case by the Mitty Foundation against Nate Paul and his entities was that if the SEC sued Nate Paul and got a receiver appointed, that receiver might try to disgorge the settlement. Yes?
We call that clawback, and that was a concern.
Yes, and it was a concern that you had and a very good reason not to settle. True?
And I expressed that to the Attorney General's office on multiple occasions. Yes, sir.
To whom? At the Attorney General?
Josh Godby and Darren McCarty.
And Darren McCarty was, well, you used a word to describe him in your testimony before the House, right?
That was
What word?
that was indiscreet.
What word did you use to describe him?
It begins with an A and it ends with an E and it has 7 letters.
Okay. But you don't have any evidence that Ken Paxton ordered him to be an a-hole to you, do you?
Other than what Mr. McCarty told me.
Oh, other than what Mr. McCarty told you, no?
Right.
Okay. Should be clear, maybe Darren McCarty was just born that way, right?
Or maybe he was just doing what he was told.
But you don't know either way, do you?
I don't know either way.
I didn't think so. At some point in time, bankruptcy entered the discussion in this litigation, true?
Mr. Paul filed bankruptcy 5 minutes before the deposition of his vice president of accounting. Yes, sir.
Okay, and just tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what happens when you file a bankruptcy petition on behalf of an entity in litigation?
There's an automatic stay in all litigation involving that entity.
Okay, I'm going to approach you with what has been marked as Exhibit AG 212. And while I'm up there, I'm going to give you AG 41-2 to save time, okay?
Okay.
Mr. President, we move for admission of Exhibits AG 212 and 41.
41's been pre-admitted, so it's on our books.
Thank you, Mr. President.
212, any objection?
No, Your Honor. Like most exhibits, these match things we would produce on our own.
Mr. Arroyo, if you would, Exhibit AG 212.
Please admit 212 into evidence.
And Exhibit 212 is a letter from you, true?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you're writing to Elizabeth Dykeman. Who's Elizabeth Dykeman?
She was a court administrator for one of the judges in Travis County District Court.
Okay, and you're notifying her of removing a briefing deadline, I guess, as a result of a bankruptcy filing. Is that right?
Yes, as we discussed, when the automatic stay kicks in, then everything stops, but the judges don't necessarily know that, so it's customary to notify them.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, for one of the 3 months that the AG was intervened in this lawsuit, it was subject to the automatic stay, right?
Right, although we were litigating like crazy in bankruptcy court.
Yeah, but AG wasn't part of that, true?
I don't believe so.
They were a notice party, but they weren't part of the litigation in bankruptcy court, true?
I don't believe they appeared in bankruptcy court.
Okay, so to be fair, you're litigating with this guy on behalf of the Mitty Foundation all over the place. AAA, State District Court, multiple lawsuits, bankruptcy court.
8 appeals.
8 appeals. And all that's with charitable money, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Trying to get our charitable money back. Yes, sir.
And I believe you. And it sounds like you're going to get over 7 times the initial capital outlay back, right?
Long, hard fight, but yes, sir.
Okay. And to be clear for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, in the previous 2 months before that bankruptcy filing by Nate Paul's entity in this litigation, AG's office was trying to foster a settlement between the parties, true?
They were trying to force a settlement on us.
When you say force, they can't force you to do anything, can they?
They were applying pressure. They weren't successful, but they tried.
They couldn't force you to do anything, could they?
I'll stand by my previous answer. They were trying, but they could not force us.
I appreciate your answer, but I need an answer to my question.
Okay.
The Office of the Attorney General could not force you to settle anything, true?
No, just pressure us.
No further questions.
Redirect?
No, Mr. President, thank you.
Are both sides excusing the witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
We release this witness.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chester. Very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
The House calls Andrew Wicker.
Bailiff, bring in Andrew Wicker. Mr. Wicker, please raise your right hand. I do solemnly swear or affirm that the evidence I give upon this hearing by the Senate of Texas of impeachment charges against Warren Kenneth Paxton Jr. shall be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help me God. Please be seated.
May I proceed, Mr. President?
You may proceed.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
Andrew James Wicker.
Mr. Wicker, it's a large room. Yeah.
Okay. Andrew James Wicker.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school?
I went to school at Prestonwood Christian Academy. That's where I graduated from high school. I grew up in Prosper, Texas, a little town north of Frisco, Texas, in North Dallas.
Let me pause you for a moment.
Okay.
Can y'all hear him well enough? Okay.
No? Okay. How about this?
Thank you. Much
All
better.
right.
Please go ahead.
My name is Andrew James Wicker. I grew up in Prosper, Texas. I grew up going to school at Prestonwood Christian Academy, which is where I graduated from high school. I then continued on to go to SMU for undergrad, and then I went on to a graduate degree at Georgetown University.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about what activities you were involved in college or in while getting your master's?
In terms of my involvement in college, my first job was working for Don Huffines on his Senate campaign. And then I continued on to later be involved with founding the Young Americans for Freedom chapter at SMU, where I served as vice president. And then I helped refound the College Republicans for SMU. I ended up working with several student organizations on a 9/11 flag memorial and pro-life memorial. We had a tiff, I would say, with the administration. And so I got involved in politics in that way. And then I continued on to Georgetown and landed in DC for my graduation. And then I went to work for General Paxton.
Okay. Do you recall approximately what time or the date that you went to work for Ken Paxton?
My employment with the OAG started September of 2019.
How did you originally meet Mr. Paxton?
I had met General Paxton previously, both as my state senator, but also as the Attorney General at various Lincoln Reagan Day dinners. In terms of my employment and the opportunity to start working for him, I met him through Mark Rylander, who was a previous associate in North Texas in terms of my community. And I was recommended for the position by Mark Rylander to General Paxton. And that's whenever I met him at the Marriott Marquis in DC, and I was hired.
Okay. If Jeff Mateer was the first assistant, did Mr. Rylander have a nickname as well?
He was known commonly as the first friend.
Okay. And through that connection, you end up working at the Office of the Attorney General. In what role? What'd you do?
My title was executive aide to the Texas Attorney General, and then I was also on the campaign staff as well.
And what does an executive aide do?
My responsibilities expanded and contracted as I also had to assume scheduling responsibilities. We had 2 schedulers during my time there. Whenever we did not have a scheduler, I assumed those responsibilities, but my standard job responsibilities during whenever I was performing the functions as an executive aide was to ensure that the general was going to his schedule on time, that he was prepared for those appointments, and that he had all necessary documents and context to the discussions that he was having for that day.
That sounds like a great deal of access to the Attorney General. Is that fair?
Yes.
Approximately how much time did you spend with each other in any given day?
At least 8 hours, normally closer to probably 10.
And was that just weekdays or weekends as well?
That would include weekends.
How often was Attorney General Ken Paxton in Austin in 2020?
This was during COVID, so after probably the first 3 or 4 weeks of COVID setting in, he spent the majority of his time in Austin, starting in probably about April-May timeframe through the remainder of 2020.
And where was Senator Angela Paxton?
She regularly split her time both between their home in McKinney and in Austin.
What was your relationship with the Paxtons, individually and as a couple?
Individually, I would call General Paxton as a friend. I spent a great deal of time with him. He and I bonded over a good number of activities, such as watching football, sometimes talking politics, but just talking life. With Senator Paxton, I would say that she was nothing but loving and caring. I think she also understood that the demands of the job kept me away from my family, so in many ways, she was kind and understanding in the way that a mother would be normally. As a couple, I would say that they were incredibly welcoming and caring to me, and always inclusive.
So fair to say there's no animosity or bad blood between you and the Paxtons?
Not from me, no.
Are you part of some vast conspiracy to harm them?
No.
Are you in league with TLR or the Bushes?
No.
Are you here to tell the truth?
Yes.
I'm going to turn your attention to Nate Paul. Are you familiar with that name?
Yes.
How so?
During 2020, I was introduced to Nate Paul, and there were a number of activities and discussions that revolved around Nate Paul throughout 2020.
Can you tell me the first time you remember hearing of Nate Paul or meeting him?
The first time I remember meeting Nate Paul would have been February or March of 2020. General Paxton and I met him for lunch at Terry Black's barbecue.
Was it just the three of you?
It was.
And what was the topic of conversation?
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor,
Sustained.
may I please respond? Anything from Ken Paxton is an admission by party opponent. Nate Paul is very clearly tied to a conspiracy, at least in terms of the evidence before this Senate, and Drew Wicker is available for cross-examination. None of that evidence is hearsay.
Again, Your Honor, the question she asked, she did not specify who was talking. Anything Nate Paul may or may not have said would be hearsay.
Sustained.
In the course of getting to know Nate Paul and Ken Paxton as a friendship, well, let me do this differently. How are the interactions between Nate Paul and Ken Paxton?
I'm sorry, can you state this question again?
Yes, sir. What was the relationship like between Nate Paul and Ken Paxton?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. He can testify about what he saw and maybe what he heard from Ken Paxton, but that's the extent of it.
It's foundational evidence, Your Honor. He can testify to his rational perception of the facts.
Sustained.
Did you see the two of these men interact with one another?
Yes.
And what did you see in terms of their demeanor?
A cordial relationship?
Did Mr. Paxton look to be under pressure to you?
No.
Now, I'm going to turn your attention to the second time you had lunch with them. Do you recall that?
Yes.
And where was that?
That was at Polvos, downtown in Austin.
Do you recall approximately when?
This would have been May, June timeframe.
Okay. And was anybody else present for that lunch?
Ryan Bangert.
Does Mr. Bangert work for Attorney General Ken Paxton at that point?
He did.
Is he there in his personal capacity or as part of his job duties?
He was asked by the general to attend as part of his job responsibilities.
And what was the topic of that conversation?
The Many Foundation.
Did anything change in regards to what Mr. Paul wanted between the first and the second lunch?
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for hearsay again.
Your Honor, if I may, I would really appreciate it if you would look at 801 E2D, specific to co-conspirator statements.
Your Honor, there's no evidence of any silly conspiracy. This is hearsay.
This entire trial has been about a conspiracy, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Who paid for lunch?
Nate Paul.
How did you perceive their demeanor and interactions with one another, hostile or friendly?
Between Nate Paul and Ken Paxton?
Yes, sir.
Friendly.
What about Ryan Bangert? How was his demeanor?
Inquisitive.
Did he seem to agree with what it is they wanted?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. We've already heard from Mr. Bangert.
That is exactly
This is
why it's
speculation.
relevant, Your Honor. He attacked the credibility of Mr. Bangert. So it is not only not hearsay because he's a representative working for Attorney General Ken Paxton, who would have adopted a belief in or offered contrary information to. In addition to that, it's a consistent statement used to rehabilitate Ryan Bangert because of their attacks.
Your Honor, I'm sorry to belabor this, but Mr. Bangert testified. And to have this witness tell us what Mr. Bangert's attitude was about some lunch 3 or 4 years ago is just improper.
Time frame has nothing to do with exceptions to hearsay, Your Honor.
Overruled.
Thank you. Can you please tell me what Ryan Bangert was saying in response to this conversation?
Okay, Your Honor, now she changed the question. And
I'm
she didn't get it.
entitled to do that.
Let me finish my objection, please. Now instead of the witness answering the last question, now she's asked a clearly hearsay question.
I went more specifically at it after the court's ruling, which I'm entitled to do.
She cannot ask this witness what Ryan Bangert said. She just can't do that, and that's what she just did.
Sustained.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm going to turn your attention to the third lunch involving Nate Paul and Ken Paxton. Can you tell me when that was?
This would have been June, July timeframe.
Of 2020?
Yes, ma'am.
And who was present at that lunch?
General Paxton, myself, and Nate Paul.
What was the topic of conversation for this lunch?
The FBI raid on Nate Paul's home and office.
Specifically, access to the affidavit underlying that search warrant?
Objection leading. And again, Your Honor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but she's asking about what Nate Paul said at a lunch. That's improper, and that would be hearsay.
Your Honor, may we approach?
You may approach.
May I proceed? Outside of those 3 lunches in which you ate with Nate Paul and Ken Paxton, did you have occasion to be around them on other times, other occasions?
Yes.
And what kind of things would you do together? Where would you see them together?
There were 2 types of instances. The first was continued lunches, usually at Polvo's. The second was meeting at Nate Paul's place of business. And I was not part of those discussions whenever those did occur.
So to make sure that I understand, there would be times you were at lunch but not seated at the table and eating with them.
That's correct.
How many times did that occur?
Dozen and a half.
And what about trips to Nate Paul's business? How many times do you recall that happening?
At least a half dozen.
Were you ever at Nate Paul's home?
No.
And did you ever see Nate Paul join Ken Paxton at the office?
Only once.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. Your Honor, at this time, the House offers House Exhibit 704, which is a public record. It is already on file, and there's a business records affidavit attached that has been on file with the court and defense for over 14 days.
Any objection once you read that?
Your Honor, there's a facial problem on this exhibit. It claims an affidavit proving up 12 pages of records, but apparently there's 23. I don't know if there's anything in here that matters, but the affidavit is improper and obviously inaccurate, unless somebody wants to correct me.
Your Honor, it's a record of the Texas Department of Public Safety, and pursuant to the rules related to public records, it would be incumbent upon Mr. Busby to establish why he thinks the records would be inaccurate. Also, the page count is likely attributable to the fact that photographs were enlarged and attached.
Again, Your Honor, she's the proponent of this document. It says it's 12 pages. It's not 12 pages. I mean, that right there gives us some element of maybe it's not trustworthy, and she's the proponent. She needs to show us why the affidavit doesn't match the documents attached. That's her job.
Your Honor, I'm confident in my response as it exists, but let me speak to my co-counsel out of a moment of respect.
May I approach and give the court a copy of what I'm looking at?
I would also add that at the conclusion of each of the records is a notification that it's a certified copy. It comes in 3 different exceptions to hearsay: business record, public record, and it's a certified copy. Additionally, I emphasize that the Attorney General works for the state of Texas, and these are state of Texas records. It's intellectually dishonest for him to fight them. Mr. President, while you're considering, can I also ask that the clock be stopped and we returned about 10 minutes between the last 2 sections of this? It's an excellent defense strategy, but it's slowing us down since we agreed to all of their exhibits, and they would not for hours.
Your Honor, I'm sorry. This is important. First off, I've been called intellectually dishonest because I look at an affidavit that says 12 pages and it's 23. And now that we're playing games because they're offering an exhibit that's clearly not what they claim it is. So I'm just making my objections, and that's all I'm doing.
Yes. You stipulated it was 12. It's 23.
Yep.
So I am going to overrule the objection because there are 5 large photographs, may account for it, and it is a government document. But I'm not giving you back the time because if you had explained this up front, we wouldn't be having this issue.
That seems fair, Mr. President. I'll go faster.
Overruled. Here's your document back.
Stacy, would you turn to, don't publish it yet, but
704 is admitted into evidence.
turn to the picture we discussed. If we were to show you a picture of Nate Paul, would you be able to identify him?
Yes.
And are you going to feel like I've led you, or if I show you the wrong picture, will you correct it?
Yes.
Yes, you'll correct me?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, sir. Permission to publish.
Yes.
Who do you see on the screen before you?
That is Nate Paul.
And is this the same person that was having lunch with Ken Paxton on those occasions and whose office that you visited?
It was.
And is this the same person who is currently facing charges in the federal courts?
Objection, hearsay, and relevance.
Sustained.
Is this the same person who was discussing the Mitty Foundation in front of you?
Objection, hearsay. We've already discussed this. This is hearsay.
He was having the conversation with Ken Paxton, who's a party opponent, Your Honor. And again, I would direct you to 801.
Overruled.
Thank you. Is this the same person who was discussing Mitty with you and Ken Paxton?
Yes.
The same person who discussed that in front of Ryan Bangert?
Yes.
And was he making requests or pressure upon the office?
Objection, hearsay.
Overruled.
What kind of things was he asking the office to do?
Objection, Your Honor. That's hearsay.
Let me go back and do it exactly the same way that he just overruled. Is this the same person who was talking to Nate Paul and Ken Paxton about MIDI?
Yes.
And what kind of things was he asking the office to do?
Objection. Assumes facts not in evidence. No one's established he was asking for anything. Hearsay.
What was he asking of the office?
Again, Your Honor, she just asked the exact same question. Hearsay and assumes facts not in evidence.
I understand why he doesn't want this in, Your Honor, but can we stop the clock again?
No, we're not going to stop the clock each moment we haven't throughout the trial. If there's a long delay, I will stop the clock and give you time back. We're going to sustain the objection, and both sides need to stop the ongoing speaking objections.
Yes, Your Honor. May I get a clarification? A moment ago it was overruled and then sustained. Is Nate Paul going to be considered a co-conspirator for the purpose of this line of questioning or not?
Your Honor, before you, if I could, a conspiracy requires an agreement. Can I take the witness on voir dire to establish there's never an agreement? A conspiracy at its heart requires an agreement between two parties and then acts in furtherance of the conspiracy. There's been no evidence whatsoever in this trial. There can be no evidence in this trial of any agreement between Nate Paul and Attorney General Paxton. This witness will confirm that. I would like to take him on voir dire to establish that, and we'll put an end to all this.
If I may clarify, it is not incumbent on the sponsoring witness to establish conspiracy. That is an obligation of the court or the presiding officer. This entire case has been about Nate Paul and Ken Paxton, and I understand why they don't want it in, but that goes to weight, not admissibility, and he can be crossed on these issues. This entire trial has been about Nate Paul and Ken Paxton.
Two questions, Your Honor, to establish with this young man that there was never an agreement. He never heard an agreement, no conspiracy, and we can quit talking about that. They can use this word all day long like they've been, but they cannot establish an agreement between Nate Paul and Ken Paxton.
If I may.
We'll stop the clock for a moment. Ms. Epley, Mr. Busby, come up.
Blood circulating. Yeah.
Ms. Epley, you may. We've already ruled on that issue. You may move forward.
Yes, Your Honor. Based on the ruling, I will proceed. I'm going to turn your attention to specific silos in the office. Are you comfortable with that term? Do you know what I mean? In terms of MIDI, foreclosure, open records, and Brandon Kamek or the search warrant?
Yes.
Okay. Turning your attention to the open records request, who was in charge of the division during that relevant time period?
Ryan Vassar.
And do you recall an occasion in which you were asked to collect a file specific to an open records request?
Yes.
What were you asked to do?
I was asked to pick up those documents for Ryan Vassar and provide them to General Paxton.
Did you do that?
Yes.
What, if anything, do you recall about that package?
I recall that it was in a sealed manila envelope and it had a CD with it.
And when you say CD, I know common parlance, but can you explain specifically what you mean?
A compact disc to go into a computer to maintain digital files.
So something with structure to it that would hold additional data.
Yes.
Why do you remember it being there?
Because it was on the outside.
Where did you take that file?
General Paxton.
How long did it stay with General Paxton, or did you collect it at some point?
I did collect it at some point.
How long was it gone? How long was it with?
A week and a half.
After you collected the file, where did you return it to?
Ryan Vassar.
Do you recall during this time frame whether or not you had done any pickups or deliveries involving Nate Paul and Ken Paxton?
The deliveries that I made to Nate Paul took place in May and June.
Okay, and can you tell us about that?
There were 3 occurrences in which I met Nate Paul to pick up or deliver items. The first was to deliver a manila envelope. The second was to pick up the general's phone that he had left at Nate Paul's office. And the third was to pick up documents related to the MIDI Foundation to deliver to Ryan Bangert.
Now, you mentioned the delivery of a manila envelope. Do you recall whether that was substantially similar to the one that you had picked up from Ryan Vassar and delivered to Ken Paxton?
I do not.
Do you recall how heavy or thick the package was?
I do not.
Could you use your fingers to demonstrate for the senators, similar to the way you explained it to us the first time? What is the smallest and largest it could have been?
The smallest that it could have been would have been about this.
I'm sorry, Drew. You want to object? He already said he doesn't remember. Now he's just speculating.
Overruled.
Please go ahead.
The way I explained it to the House impeachment managers was this size to this size.
And do you recall whether or not that package had any CDs attached to it?
I do not.
Do you know if it contained any?
No.
So would you be able to tell these senators that it was in any way substantially different than from what you received from Ryan Vassar and delivered to Ken Paxton?
No.
Okay. When we first spoke, do you recall approximately when that was?
May.
May
of this year.
And did you want to speak with us?
No.
What did you understand at the time, whether you were correct or incorrect? What did you understand we were doing?
My understanding was that there were questions about funding the settlement of the whistleblowers.
And when you arrived, was it subsequent to a subpoena?
It was.
Was that necessary in order to have you attend?
It was.
Did you arrive alone?
No.
Who were you with?
My attorney.
Who is your attorney?
John Evans.
Is he present here today?
He is.
And why did you retain Mr. Evans?
I retained Mr. Evans 3 years ago after the events that occurred in the fall of 2020. I retained Mr. Evans after being reached out to by the FBI, and after being offered counsel by the Office of the Attorney General, I chose to retain my own counsel that would look out for my own interests.
I want to make sure that I understand. At some point, the Office of the Attorney General offered to provide you an attorney?
Yes.
Are you under the impression you had done anything wrong?
No.
Did the Office of the Attorney General indicate whether or not they wanted you to speak to FBI?
They indicated that they would not like me to speak to the FBI.
And you said to protect your interests. What concerns did you have about using their attorney as opposed to your own?
I would assume that an attorney employed by the Office of the Attorney General would look out for the interest of that institution, but not for me.
And did you feel then that your motives or your interests were not aligned?
I didn't know that they were not aligned, but I wanted to make sure that they were aligned to my interests.
Okay. When we had you come in and speak to us in May of 2023, what was your demeanor, in your opinion, when you first came in? Were you forthcoming and happy to talk?
No.
Were you honest to the best of your ability?
Yes.
And was that statement consistent with the testimony you're giving today?
Yes.
And was it consistent with the testimony, or at least the statements you had provided 3 years before that date?
Yes, they were.
I saw you hesitate. Did you correct yourself on your own at some point during the conversation with us?
I did.
What was that about?
The correction was a question by the House team asking me whether or not I had delivered documents to Nate Paul. Over the course of that discussion, I was asked about it again, and I recalled that I had in fact done so, and I have since verified with my attorney and with other law enforcement officials that that is consistent with my testimony from 3 years ago.
Thank you, sir. There was some implication that we had threatened, or I think it was Mr. Busby talking about squeezing you. Did you feel squeezed?
No.
Did we threaten you at all?
No.
Did we lead you or give you the answers?
No.
So when you made that correction, why did you do it?
I did so because I remembered something, and I had misrepresented my testimony whenever I provided an incorrect answer earlier, and so I sought to correct that.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to turn your attention then to the foreclosure, and specifically whether or not you overheard any conversations involving Ken Paxton related to the foreclosure.
Okay.
Do you recall any conversations?
I recall one conversation.
And what was that?
It was a conversation where I was in Ryan Bangert's office and overheard he and Ryan Bangert discussing.
Sorry, Drew. He who?
General Paxton and Ryan Bangert were discussing the opinion, and General Paxton asked Mr. Bangert if he had been able to reach out and contact an individual. Mr. Bangert responded that this individual had not been helpful in the matter that he had reached out about.
Let me pause you. Not helpful in what way? They just declined to assist?
I'm not completely aware, no.
Okay, go ahead.
The second part of that conversation was in which the general expressed a desire to make sure that grandmothers were not evicted from their homes, and that's where I learned about the foreclosure opinion.
Are you aware that there was a stay related to residential homes at the time?
At the time, I probably was.
So the foreclosure letter would have impacted commercial business, not residential?
Objection, leading, and speculation.
Sustained.
I'm going to turn your attention to the Omni Hotel in the summer of 2020. Were you familiar with that hotel at that time?
I was.
And why is that?
During the course of General Paxton's renovations at his home, that's where he was staying in the interim.
Okay, I'm going to come back to the renovations at his home, but help me understand, do you have any personal knowledge of Mr. Paxton being at the Omni in the summer of 2020?
I do.
How's that?
General Paxton called off his protective detail for the time that he was staying at the Omni Hotel. And as part of my job responsibilities, I picked him up and dropped him off each day to the Omni Hotel.
Did Mr. Paxton drop his security detail on few or many occasions in 2020?
It came in spurts.
Help me understand spurts. What would that frequency be?
There were times at which it was highly frequent and I was his primary means of transportation, and there were other times at which we utilized the protective detail.
And while we're on the topic, so that I can move a little faster, what about items being on a schedule? Was everything he did through OAG or personally reflected on a schedule?
No.
Is the schedule supposed to contain the comings and goings of the Attorney General?
More generally, yes.
Why is that?
For the assistance of DPS specifically, I would provide a 2-week outlook on the schedule so that they could understand where appointments were, what time, who their POC was at that place and time, so that they could coordinate security efforts.
And were there occasions in which Mr. Paxton's plans were not contained on his schedule,
Yes.
specifically related to Nate Paul?
Yes.
How do you know that?
Because I managed the schedule.
Did you have concerns about that at the time?
No.
At some point, did it become concerning enough to you for you to speak to a supervisor?
Yes.
Who was your supervisor?
Blake Brickman.
And why would you go to Blake Brickman about such a concern?
I was receiving some new requests in terms of both transportation as well as documentation and scheduling, and I was trying to understand the best way to handle that with my boss, who is General Paxton.
I'm going to return you back to the Omni. On one occasion, were you there with your family?
Yes.
Can you quickly tell the Senate why you were there and for how long?
My family had come down for a weekend. I don't recall if there was any sort of special significance for that occasion. They were down there to stay there for the weekend. General Paxton was also there at that time due to the renovations being conducted on his home, and they were staying down there, and I chose to stay with them for the time that they were at that hotel as well.
Did you have occasion to see Ken Paxton while you were there?
I did run into him, yes.
Can you please tell us about that?
My mom and sister had gone up to the hotel room. My father and I had run back to my apartment downtown. Upon returning to the Omni Hotel and entering the lobby, we turned right to go into the elevators. We had pushed the button and were waiting on the elevators, and on the other side of the door, my father and I heard a lively discussion, just to be clear, not adversarial, just lively. And whenever the doors opened, 2 individuals exited. One was General Paxton. He was in workout attire, and he told us that he was going to the gym. The other individual was in a dress and high heels and exited rather quickly. General Paxton walked out, shook my hand as well as my father's. We spoke for a moment, and then he told us he was going to work out.
Was there anyone else on the elevator for which that lively conversation could have included?
No.
And what, if anything, did you notice about the dynamic between the two, if anything at all?
I couldn't overhear the conversation, but whenever they exited, she quickly exited the elevator, and that was the only time I really saw them interact in person.
Did that cause any concern for you or questions?
It did spur some questions.
And who would you have directed those questions to?
I reached out to Mark Rylander about that.
And why did you reach out to Mark Rylander?
Prior to coming to the office of the Attorney General, I had been informed that there had been...
Objection, hearsay.
Sustained.
Did you have reason to think, whether true or not true on the part of Mr. Rylander, this might be something of interest to him?
Objection. Yes. Again, Your Honor, she's just trying to ask a different way. This is based on hearsay.
Overruled.
Did you have any reason to think this might be of interest to him?
Yes.
And was it?
Yes.
Did he seem to understand who it was you had seen?
Yes.
Did you receive a photograph to confirm?
Yes.
Now, I'm not going to show you the same photograph, but I am going to show you a person. Would you be able to tell me if this was the person that you saw in the elevator?
Yes.
May I approach? So used to government work, I forget we have technology. Can I turn everyone's attention to 704? And Stacy, would you pull up the photograph, please? Do you recognize the person in this picture, whether you know her name or not?
I do.
For purposes of the record, the person being depicted in the photograph is Laura Olson, as established by her Texas driver's license. Thank you, Stacy. I have $6.99. Next, Your Honor, the House offers Exhibit 699. It is a business record as established by the affidavit on the face. I'm confident that the page count will match this time as there's no substantial photographs, and it has been on record for over 14 days. And it is being admitted by agreement as I understand it.
Any objection?
No objection, Your Honor.
Admit Exhibit 699 into evidence.
Now, Mr. Wicker, I'm not going to have you do this, but inside of an apartment complex application, would it explain where you have lived before and where you're going to live now? I know that didn't make sense. Are you aware of the fact that application leases will establish your prior address as well as your current one?
Yes,
And is the name on that record the same as the driver's license, Laura Olson?
it is.
Is that the woman that you saw step off the elevator with Ken Paxton?
It is.
You mentioned home renovations. Do you remember why those renovations were occurring?
There were storms late spring that caused water damage to General Paxton's Austin home.
Okay. I don't want you to give the address, but could you give us the street name so that we're all familiar with the fact that we're speaking about the same thing?
Margarinita Crescent.
So you said spring. Do you recall what month the damage occurred in?
This probably would have occurred March, April timeframe.
Okay. And do you know where the damage was?
To the best of my recollection, it was confined to the master bedroom.
Why would you know that?
I met with the insurance adjuster multiple times at the request of General Paxton while he was out of town or in other meetings.
So there were occasions where you were authorized on his behalf to conduct personal business, for example, the adjustment of the insurance.
I was authorized to greet the insurance adjuster and show them the home.
Does that mean you would sometimes also receive records related to the home renovation?
I can only think of one occurrence in which that happened.
And what was that?
I received an invoice that I had been included on from the STEAM team.
And are you aware, as the adjuster, that there are some renovations that were done pursuant to the water damage itself and covered by insurance?
I would assume so, yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn everyone's attention to House Exhibit 703. Again, it's a business record. It's Cupertino Builders. There's a business record affidavit, and it's been on file for over 14 days.
Any objection?
No, sir.
Admit 703 into evidence.
Stacy, would you please pull up the face of the email that's attached? Mr. Wicker, do you recognize the name of the individual who sent the email?
Kevin Wood.
And who is Kevin Wood?
Kevin Wood was the lead contractor at the Paxton's home renovation.
Is he someone that you met personally?
He is.
How many times did you see or speak with Kevin Wood?
At least a half dozen.
And do you see that on the to line is the name Raj Kumar?
I see yes, I do.
And moving down further, do you see that Nate Paul was or N Paul at worldclass.com was the person who emailed Kevin Wood?
I do.
Where is that? What are we looking at?
Is the body of that email related to home items or repairs, things that need to be done?
It would appear so, yes.
I'm going to have Stacy then turn to the first couple of pictures in the file. Can we see the next? Does anything about the home being depicted look familiar to you?
Several of these images do appear to be, that's the Paxton's dining room.
Are you wondering or are you sure?
No, I'm positive.
Thank you. On how many occasions were you at the Margarinita home in the summer of 2020 during renovations?
During the renovations, half dozen.
Okay. And do you recall any times that you were present where Kevin Wood and Ken Paxton were both there?
I do.
I'm going to turn your attention to a conversation about the kitchen. Do you recall whether or not there was any damage to that area of the home?
I do not.
Would it make sense then that these are things external to insurance coverage?
It would make sense.
Were those ever, is that an area of the home that you ever discussed in regards to being an adjuster or assisting the adjuster, rather?
Not to my recollection.
Okay. Can you walk us through any conversations you overheard between Kevin Wood and Ken Paxton?
Objection, Your Honor. Anything Kevin Wood may have said would be hearsay.
At this stage, Your Honor, it's not being offered for the truth. It's to set an anchor. I will get more specific in a moment.
Again, Your Honor, the question is very nonspecific, and anything she's going to ask about what Kevin Wood may have said is hearsay.
Your Honor, it is clear from the course of the conversation that Kevin Wood was acting as a service provider. At that point, the truth doesn't matter. At the point in which it does, it goes to his motive, intent, and plan.
Again, Your Honor, you've already... She just said what Kevin Wood said wouldn't matter. I agree. Hearsay and irrelevant.
I didn't say it ultimately wouldn't matter, Your Honor. It will matter very much.
Sustain.
Did you get an idea as to what the relationship was between Ken Paxton and Kevin Wood?
Kevin Wood was the lead contractor on General Paxton's home.
And if Mr. Paxton then wanted additional things or changes to the renovation, whom would he speak with?
Kevin Wood.
Is there any other way Mr. Paxton would find out the timing of renovations or the duration of renovations or the cost of renovations other than Kevin Wood?
Objection, compound, and speculation. She is asking what Ken Paxton would do and what he would know. That's pure speculation.
It's an operative fact, Your Honor. There's no other way for him to know it.
Again, she just asked what Ken Paxton might know. That's speculation.
I'm going to overrule. You can answer if you know.
Not to my knowledge.
I don't even remember the question at this point, frankly. I might have to read it back. At any point, were there conversations about changes to the property?
Yes.
Isn't that the entire point of a contractor?
Yes.
And at any point, were there discussions about particular items in the home?
Yes.
Would what matters to you be whether a counter is granted or not, or whether the renovations are occurring at this stage?
Objection, vague, and relevance.
Did you care what his countertops were made of?
Again, Your Honor, what does it matter whether young Drew Wicker cares about the countertops? It's irrelevant.
Overrule.
Did you care what the countertops were made of?
No.
Did anything about a conversation related to countertops concern you?
Objection, hearsay.
It is not being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. There's no statement. It asks if he overheard something he was concerned about.
She just asked for hearsay right there, Your Honor. That's hearsay.
No, Your Honor, it goes to state of mind.
Overruled.
Thank you. At some point, did you hear something that concerned you?
Yes.
What was that?
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, there's three places. One, nucleus of operative facts, because it goes to the center of this. Specific to hearsay, it goes to state of mind. There's no other way for General Paxton to know how long something is going to take or what it will cost other than speaking to his contractor. And finally, it goes to Drew Wicker's state of mind in regards to what he does next because of what he heard, whether the statement is true or not.
Your Honor, we need to know who she's talking about was speaking. I think she's trying to elicit testimony about what this man heard a contractor say who has been subpoenaed and who could come here and testify. This is not the right witness for that.
I'm going to overrule. You're not saying it's the truth of the matter, just the statement was made.
That's at this point, Your Honor. Mr. President, thank you. What did you hear that concerned you?
Kevin Wood stated that he would check with Nate on several of the items.
Now, was that about how long something would take or when something would be delivered?
No, sir. No, ma'am. It was with regards to cost.
Now, if Kevin Wood's a contractor who's trying to make money on his own, why would he need to check with anyone?
Objection, speculation.
Sustained.
So let's back up a little bit. What would he have to check with Nate on specifically? Please tell us in detail what you recall.
He was stating that he would need to check with Nate on the cost of countertops and renovations to the cabinetry in the kitchen.
I'm going to be very specific. Did he have to check on the cost, or did he have to check on, did Mr. Wood seem to already understand what the cost would be?
Yes.
And what was the cost?
He mentioned the total of $20,000
For what?
for the cabinetry and the countertops.
And what was Ken Paxton's response? That he wanted to do it or did not want to do it?
He stated that he would like to move forward.
And then what was said by Kevin Wood?
He said, I would check with Nate.
Did you relay that conversation to anyone?
I related to two individuals.
Were either of them people who worked above you at the Office of the Attorney General?
Yes.
Were you relaying the information to be salacious or for another reason?
I was seeking advice.
And who did you speak to?
I spoke to Mark Rylander and Blake Brickman.
What did Mark Rylander or Blake Brickman advise you to do?
Objection, hearsay.
Your Honor, they're both.
Sustained.
Okay. What did you do after speaking to Mark Rylander and Blake Brickman?
I spoke to General Paxton.
What did you say to Mr. General Paxton?
I asked him about the conversation that I'd overheard, and I stated that I walked away with a certain impression.
Let me pause you. With what impression?
I walked away with the impression that Nate Paul was involved in the renovations of General Paxton's home.
What concerns did you have about that?
Given the fact that we were working on several items related to Mr. Paul, it felt as though there might be an inappropriate relationship there.
Were you that clear with the general?
Yes.
And what happened?
He stated that he appreciated me bringing his concern to him, and that he then assured me that that was in fact not the case.
Did his explanation absolve all concerns?
No.
How did you feel at the conclusion of that conversation?
Still uneasy, but I never discussed it after that with him.
Okay. Are you aware of the fact that we've issued subpoenas for Kevin Wood for him to address these issues and that he does not intend to testify before this court?
Objection, speculation. She's just testifying now.
Sustained.
Did you spend much time at the Paxton home after that?
Not much, no.
Why not?
It was a mix of ongoing renovations, increased travel, and just lack of requests to be there.
Did you feel comfortable about the home or being present at the home?
Not always, no.
Why is that?
There were still some lingering concerns over the questions that I had asked the general, but I had not followed up on those concerns.
In the summer of 2020, prior to the whistleblowing allegations, did you have an opinion as to the veracity or the truthfulness of Mark Penley?
Yes.
And what was it?
He seemed to be an individual of the utmost integrity.
And did you have an opinion as to the credibility or truthfulness of Jeff Mateer?
Yes.
I'm sorry, it's not proper for one witness to talk about whether another witness is truthful. That's just not how it works.
It absolutely is, Your Honor.
Please let me finish and quit interrupting, please. Your Honor, it's not proper for one witness to sit up on the stand and say, this person's truthful, that's not how it works. It's improper. I object.
He's absolutely right in a vacuum. I would have no authority to talk about the character of truthfulness as a primary rule, and I wouldn't infringe it. But once he attacks their credibility, Rule 405A1 allows me to establish by reputation or opinion a relevant character trait. In this case, truthfulness.
That's not how it works, Your Honor.
Yes, it is.
Anyway, this is not how it works, Your Honor. You don't get to get up here and bring one witness and talk about the veracity of all the other witnesses. Now, if she feels like Mr. Penley's veracity was challenged on some particular statement, then she brings a different statement to try to rehabilitate him. But she don't do it with this witness.
You could do it with any witness, Your Honor.
Will sustain the objection.
How did you communicate with Ken Paxton in 2020?
Through email and text message and phone calls.
How many cell phones did Ken Paxton have?
He had 2 primary, and he later obtained 2 more cell phones.
I learned through the course of opening that I used the term burner phone incorrectly. Apparently, they have to be cheap and from 7-Eleven. What would you call extra phones that most people don't know about?
Extra phones.
Okay, so two primary phones, 2 extra phones.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have the phone number of his personal phone?
I do.
And would you give us the last 4 digits of that, please?
The cell phone is 8128.
And what about his work phone?
0220.
Can you describe for us physically what the other 2 phones look like?
The other 2 phones being the extra phones?
That's correct.
Okay. The other 2 phones, one was a Samsung Galaxy Fold, the other was a red iPhone.
You mentioned that you also communicated with him by email. Outside of work email, did he have another?
He did.
What kind of account was that?
It was a Proton mail.
And do you know how the Proton account was set up?
It was set up through the OAG's office.
Why was that?
We went to China.
So it was safer to discuss business on that phone than it would be for a Chinese hacker to get into a personal cell or a work cell, correct?
Yes.
But do you also know that their headquarters are out of the United States?
I believe they're in Switzerland.
And so they wouldn't be subsequent to a search warrant and are not provided as part of a public records request to the OAG.
Objection, speculation, Your Honor.
Sustain.
And are you familiar with something called Signal?
I am.
What is that?
It is an encrypted messaging app.
Encrypted, also making it safer, correct?
Yes.
Are you aware that they too are housed out of the country, not subsequent to, or not under the pressures of a subpoena, and not provided by the OAG?
Again, Your Honor, this is just her testifying what she thinks Signal is. This witness doesn't know this. It's speculation and improper.
Sustained.
At any point, did General Paxton ask to use technology that you provided?
Yes.
What was that?
He used my personal cell phone.
How many times did the general use your personal cell phone?
At least 3 to 4.
Were you able to hear those conversations or who they were with?
I was not.
Were you able to determine after you got your property back why he needed your phone?
No.
Why not?
Whenever I received my cellular device back, the call log had been wiped.
And did he use anything of yours other than your cell phone?
No.
Do you recall after the whistleblowers, Mr. Paxton asking to use your laptop?
Yes.
What was that about?
That was a request. He was working on a letter to the Inspector General of the United States.
Can you anchor that in time for us? What had just occurred?
This was late October, and this would have been after the whistleblower complaint.
And do you know, what were you asked to do?
I was asked, General Paxton handed me a hard copy of a document and asked me to transcribe the events outlined in the document in the form of a letter to the Inspector General.
And by hard copy, you mean like what I have here?
Yes.
So not handwriting, but typed written?
Yes.
Why would you need to be provided a typed written copy of anything that's already in electronic format?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Why would you need to be provided a hand copy of anything that's already in electronic format?
I don't know.
And what were you asked to do? Transcribe, you said?
Yes.
Were you making additions or deletions?
I did make several additions, yes.
What kind of additions?
Since it was asked to be in the format of a letter to Inspector General Horowitz, it was addressed to Inspector General Horowitz. There was a slight introduction that I'd been asked to include, and then the sign-off was asked to be as General Paxton.
At this time, I offer House Exhibit 573. This is part of the Office of the Attorney General records. There is a business record affidavit. It has been on file for greater than 14 days.
Any objection?
Do we know about this? No objection, Your Honor.
Please admit Exhibit 573 into evidence.
Mr. Wicker, will you take a moment and look at the body of that letter and let me know if you recognize it?
This is the letter that I was asked to write for Inspector General Horowitz.
So if I turn you to the top where you add Dear Mr. Horowitz, you typed that in.
Yes.
Do you know who that is?
He was or is the Inspector General of the United States.
We've heard about the Office of the Inspector General throughout this trial. Do you know whether or not that's the appropriate person to go to if you want to make complaints about federal prosecutors or federal agents?
That is my understanding, yes.
At any point prior to the whistleblow situation, had Ken Paxton talked to you about or in your presence about the Office of the Attorney General?
About the Office of the Attorney General, yes.
Had he ever suggested going there or that they were the correct place to bring this complaint?
He had not mentioned that to me, no.
In fact, do you know that he didn't want to take it to OIG prior to that?
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Do you know whether or not he wanted to take Nate Paul's complaint to the OIG prior to the whistleblowers coming forward?
I do not.
And then once you look at this letter, I'm going to turn you down to the bottom in regards to the allegations made by Nate Paul, and I'm going to go quickly. Did these amount to things like not getting to use the restroom?
It did.
And when you drafted it, did you realize part of Nate Paul's big federal complaint is that he couldn't call his attorney except from using an agent's cell phone?
Yes.
And that he was not allowed to call for counsel, and that's why they provided him a cell phone?
Yes.
Are you aware that the only allegations he makes, well, let me do this differently. Where were you when you were helping type this up for the general?
This letter was written in the Office of the Attorney General.
On what laptop?
My state laptop.
And what did you do with the laptop after typing up the letter?
I followed up with General Paxton about having completed the transcribed letter.
And then what?
And I asked him what he'd like to do with it.
And what was the response?
He said that he had several insertions that he would like to make and that he would let me know about when he needed it.
Did he have you email him or put it into a USB drive?
Not to my recollection, no.
What did he do?
He asked me to bring my state laptop to his Austin home so that he could work on the letter.
And did he make changes to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, no.
Okay. Okay. After drafting the letter for the Attorney General, do you know whether or not the letter was ever sent to OIG?
I do not.
Let me turn your attention then to the conclusion of your career there. What was the status of your job?
The status was that I was both the scheduler as well as the executive aide.
Well, I mean, at the end, in October of 2020, leading into November. Were you offered a promotion? Were you offered a change in job function?
I was.
And what was that?
General Paxton had expressed an interest in myself taking on greater responsibilities with regards to certain policy areas, and that I would continue with my present job responsibilities, but also take on the additional policy-related responsibilities.
And at some point you'd mentioned that FBI had reached out to you and you make Ken Paxton aware of that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
And what did he do?
General Paxton's question that he asked me was, why?
Did you have a response for him?
No, I did not.
What, if anything, did he direct you to do?
He did not direct me to do anything at that time.
Did he take you anywhere?
Not at that time, no.
Okay. Ultimately, you say not at that time. So what happens next in regards to that?
The next discussion I had with a member of the AG staff regarding the FBI was Brent Webster requested to meet with me.
And what, if anything, did Brent Webster have to say on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General?
Objection, hearsay, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Was he working in his official capacity as a representative or employee of the Office of the Attorney General?
That is my understanding, yes.
Same question, Your Honor, subsequent to 801ED, which is specific to representatives or employees. Brett Webster is making the comment to Mr. Wicker in his capacity as an employee of Ken Paxton.
It's the same objection, Your Honor. We've established in this trial, you can't, that's not how it works. You cannot just come up here and ask him what somebody else said other than General Paxton himself.
You can when he's being directed as part of his employment.
He's not an employee of Ken Paxton.
He's an agent of Ken Paxton, so we'll overrule.
Thank you. What, if anything, did Brent Webster tell you?
Mr. Webster said that he understood that the FBI had reached out to me and that I should not respond.
Did he tell you why?
He said that I ran the risk of incriminating myself.
And did he then bring you back to Ken Paxton?
Eventually, yes.
What was that conversation about?
He believed that there was an opportunity to assert attorney-client privilege.
So he too wanted to prevent you from speaking to FBI?
It certainly seems that way, yes.
And were you asked to speak to anyone else about this?
Leslie French.
And what did she tell you to do?
Leslie French advised me that she had been through something similar and that there was nothing to worry about, that the AG's office would provide me with counsel while I met with the FBI, and that there was no need for me to bring my own counsel.
What was your response?
My response was that I would feel more comfortable retaining my own counsel that would look out for my interests.
Why did you respond that way?
Because that's where I would have been that's how I would have felt comfortable in that instance.
After all of this, what decision do you ultimately make about this promotion?
The conversation that occurred regarding the promotion was all at once, and this was actually, I informed General Paxton that I would not be taking the promotion, but I would gladly accept the responsibilities.
Why were you making that distinction?
I did not want the general to have the appearance of having offered me anything in light of the FBI reaching out.
So you were trying to protect the appearance of what that would look like for General Paxton?
For General Paxton and myself.
Thank you. Did you ultimately put in your notice and quit?
I did resign, yes.
Was that on November 2nd, 2020?
If I recall correctly, yes.
Makes sense then that payments would stop, is that correct?
Yes.
And did they stop from the Office of the Attorney General?
They did.
Did they stop overall?
No.
What else were you provided?
I was continued to be provided a monthly stipend by the campaign.
Did you notify Ken Paxton's campaign that you were still receiving money and that you should not be?
No, I had let them know that I was leaving and to cut off my access to both the email and the calendar, and that I should cease receiving stipends.
When did you cease receiving stipends?
Not until the following year.
And what, if anything, did you do with that extra money that you had been provided?
Michelle Smith had sent me a W-2 with that amount. I contacted her, not understanding that I continued to be paid. I asked her what I should do with the money and if General Paxton would like it back. She reached out to General Paxton, who informed her to tell me to keep it. And I stated no problem, and I went ahead and donated the money back.
They told you to keep it and you donated it back?
Yes.
Why did you do that?
I didn't do the work.
How did you feel about receiving money from Ken Paxton's campaign after you ceased employment and in light of all the facts relevant today?
I have no reason to believe that it was with malicious intent. It might have been an innocent mistake.
I think maybe more specifically, I'm talking about your character. What made you return it?
I didn't put in the work, and I did not want any instance, I didn't want it to appear as though I might have any conflict of interest if anything like this ever came about.
Thank you, sir. Pass the witness.